if what you want is to imbue that kind of consciousness into your day-to-day experience, that path goes straight through just the day-to-day, mundane, gritty work. As soon as we let go of attachment and genuinely open into trust, that tends to be when what we want, what we truly want, just emerges.
Brooks, what's up, man?
Hey, Scott. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, man. And boy, do I have a number of topics that I want to dive in. I think maybe to set the stage, how would you describe to someone at a, let's call it a cocktail party, what you do?
Yeah, great. So the easiest and simplest way for me to describe what I do is that I'm a leadership coach. Um, but I'm not your average leadership coach. I'm a leadership coach who focuses specifically on working with leaders who are driven to make a positive impact on the world and who are also at some moment of transition or perhaps a threshold in their life. And I could give you some examples of what I mean by that. But often it's folks who have reached some level of traditional success and realized what they really want is something deeper. Or maybe folks who are kind of coming away from some sort of burnout or misalignment or failure. But either way, there's a desire to embark on a deep inward journey to discover more about who they truly are and what their unique gifts are and how they could really step into their full potential in terms of being the leader they kind of want to be in the world. And the tools that I use for that, one main one is leadership coaching and specifically conscious leadership coaching. And then I also weave in wilderness rites of passage work and vision quests, and also, when appropriate, psychedelic guiding and medicine journey work.
Well, I think we all want to realize our full potential, right? And also realize the deepest nature of our fundamental being. And I think what I find so interesting and cool about your approach to this is that integration with nature component, right? So
Hmm.
many executives and CEOs I know, they hop on Zoom calls, they go to someone's office in a busy city, they sit there, and maybe they're told, hey, it would be really good for you to go walk in nature. But you kind of take it to the next level. And so I think what would be helpful to people that are less familiar with wilderness rites of passage, as you described, would just be to talk about what are those, and maybe we can kind of dive into like what are the power that those rituals unlock for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. So, a wilderness rite of passage, in the way that I lead them today, is um, well, it's really actually it's kind of a pan-cultural tradition. Like when we look out at the world and human history across so many cultures, and especially native cultures, indigenous cultures, kind of earth-based cultures, there is some sort of initiation ritual or rite of passage ritual that typically orients around a coming of age ceremony. And often a consistent theme in those traditions is a time by oneself out in the wild world, uh, in some kind of ceremonial context. And often there are altered states of consciousness involved. And a classic version of that, and the version I incorporate, is a fast. So oftentimes I say vision quest, and people think psychedelics or think medicine or substances. And actually, that's not the case. It's a different, and actually, in many ways, I think even more powerful process by virtue of the fact that you're not taking in any outside substance. It's just you out there with the land, but you are fasting from food, which does provide a subtle but significant shift in state. And the way I lead these experiences, there's also a key element of the framing is it's somewhat of a death and rebirth process. So participants get to choose how far they want to go along those lines, but we support them in going out on a solo for 2 days in a wild place without any food, only water. And that solo period is kind of like a ceremonial death to their old self, their old life, all that's come before. And they're invited to let go as much as they're willing to of their old identities and their old attachments so that they can open up to something larger, to the mystery and Mother Earth and spirit, or whatever names you want to use for that something larger, to receive a vision, receive some kind of metaphorical, mythopoetic vision or blueprint for what really lives at the core of them, what they came here to this planet to do, what I might call their soul and their soul's true purpose.
Why do you think it's necessary for a dedicated initiatory process or ceremony like this to help someone arrive at that answer or vision?
Yeah, good question. So one of the teachers and authors who I've been very inspired by and influenced by is Bill Plotkin of the Animas Valley Institute, and he has a great answer to this. So I'll reference him here. And the idea that Bill proposes is that there are certain stages that we can go through as humans in terms of our psychological and spiritual development. And the first few of those stages lead us through the process of basically developing a healthy ego identity. So that's the sense of separate self, this awareness of who I am relative to other people. And that's important for human development. We have to get to the point of being able to have a healthy ego to be able to operate in our society and be successful socially and interpersonally. The trouble is that, as Bill points out, and that I quite agree with, is that the vast majority of people in our kind of modern Western world never actually get past that point of development, which is characterized by the ego operating primarily in service of itself. So we develop a healthy ego. Initially, the ego wants to only serve its own needs at the end of the day, and kind of sees that as the most important goal in life. And as you know, and I think I imagine as many of your listeners know, while our egos are an important part of who we are, they're far from the complete story of who we really are. So there is a greater possibility beyond in terms of the full capacity, the full scale of who we can be and what we can create in our lives. And initiation rituals and rites of passage are an extraordinarily supportive and helpful threshold for one to pass through, to go through that ego death, so to speak, that process, because the ego is going to hang on as long as it can in the absence of some kind of external support process to actually allow the process of that ego to fall apart. So that is a lot of what these initiatory rites do, is actually provide the cultural and social context to say, okay, you've reached that point of development. You got a healthy ego online. Now it's time for that identity to die. It's time for that identity to dissolve and fall apart. And we're going to support you in that process of letting go. That's where so many of us in our society get stuck. We try to fight as hard as we can to keep ourselves together. When we are supported in an initiation or rite of passage ritual, we actually can allow ourselves to fall apart in a safe and healthy way, a psychologically and spiritually safe and healthy way, and then pull ourselves back together from a whole different place of center. So it's that falling apart that creates the space to make contact with our soul, with that deep essence inside of ourselves. And then we can rebuild the ego in a more mature way now to operate primarily in service of that essence, to operate in service of soul. So the psychologically adult or mature ego operates in service of soul, whereas the adolescent ego operates in service of itself.
It's immensely powerful to really, it sounds like these initiatory processes not only give people like a construct and container to do this, but also permission, like the notion that like, hey, this is actually just the next step in your evolution, which is largely undiscussed in the modern Western world that we live in. And I guess a question that I have for you is as I think about, for example, my own discovery of the deeper I, the true self, the soul, the many names that presence has, it was really kind of the result of years of meditation, where there was a gradual separation of between the thoughts and the interactivity and the one that was kind of watching and aware of it all. And I think about the idea of someone going into the wilderness for 2 days without any water, and how
with water, but no food.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
with
water,
with water, right? And so I think about like the meditation experience that is a common pathway to have one of these experiences, and kind of nature as a conduit to a similar type of experience. And my question would be, what is it about nature that you believe unlocks that experience in someone?
Great question. Well, yeah, and first I just want to underline what you said back there too about the like social support for like making it okay to fall apart. I think that's so key, and I lived that in a really real way myself. I kind of came to this path in sort of the most meaningful way through my own experience of that adolescent ego identity starting to fall apart, and freaking out about that, like I was so scared, like I thought I was going insane, I thought everything was lost. And then I found Bill Plotkin and the Animas Valley Institute, and it was such relief to think, oh wow, maybe I could actually trust this. Like maybe all of this is happening for me, and it's a necessary gateway to enable me to live into that higher self that I've always sensed is in there somewhere.
I feel you. I love the phrase of, in order for the old paradigm has to break down for a new one to be constructed.
Exactly.
It is literally, there's just no going around it. Like it is, that is an initiatory requisite phase of experience.
Yep.
I agree with you that it can be quite challenging and painful.
Yeah, right. As much as we can know that to be true, we still resist the breaking down. Of course, it's like just totally human. So that's part of why we need community and we need guidance around these processes. And then to get to your question around nature and the wild world, well, I think a key element of this journey, which I might call living into our fullest potential, uh, discovering and becoming the truth of who we really are, or you can call it the spiritual journey. A key element of that is a journey of, I would say, reconnection to the broader web of life, and at the sort of ultimate level, a non-dual experience of reality in which my sense of self actually melts away entirely. Michael Bernard Bethwick calls it as me consciousness. It's just, there is no I, there's just beingness, and there's no separation between me and everything else. Spirit is all of it, consciousness is all of it. That's kind of, as far as I can tell, more at the end of the road. It's useful for a lot of people to have some intermediary steps to get there. And nature is where we find, I think, some of the most easy to remember experiences of, like, oh yeah, I'm connected to all of this.
Hmm.
We humans in our modern culture like to often kind of think of ourselves as quite separate from the rest of the world, and that's I think part of that result of being stuck in the adolescent ego identity is we think we are completely separate, and so we try to control other people, we try to control nature, and we are witnessing on a very compelling scale the costs of that consciousness right now. um, when we go out into nature in a ceremonial rite of passage experience, uh, there's an opportunity to be held by the more than human world, to be guided by the more than human world in a way that really just is fundamentally life changing. Like, before you have that kind of experience, and maybe you have touched it in some way, but then you go out on your 2-day solo or 3-day solo, and you just feel it in your bones. Like, you get this just deep contact with, like, wow, it's not just a nice sounding idea that everything is interconnected and that I am one with, you know, bird and tree and rock and water. It's like I feel it to be true because I'm experiencing it, and I'm receiving love, receiving wisdom, receiving guidance and solidarity from all these more than human beings. And then, not to mention that as a gateway to spirit and soul.
I'm getting chills. Yeah, it's truly, however you come to that oneness experience. It's definitely an experiential process, not an intellectual one, which is why I think, ritual and container that facilitates it is such an imperative. I also would comment that, the soul and connectedness and intuition, and so much of the kind of that deeper connection, the requisite conditions are typically associated with some level of stillness. And
Mhm.
if you're playing on your phone, going on Twitter all day, and you're out in the wilderness and all there is to do is
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're kind of thrown into that water.
Hmm.
And
Very good point.
I can see how that adolescent ego that constantly needs to be distracted and needs to be doing the next thing and doing the next task, and all the escapist ways that we find to basically not be with what is, would eventually just be broken down after a period of time,
Yes,
right? And on the other side of that, there's actually immense beauty, but we often don't allow ourselves to get to that point.
exactly. Yeah, I'm so glad you named that too, because that is such an important element as well as to why wilderness and nature is such a powerful setting for this work. It's kind of, I think it's kind of similar maybe to like a darkness retreat, and why a lot of people are drawn into
Mm.
that experience right now. In a similar way, a wilderness rite of passage, a vision fast, uh, there's nowhere to go. It's just you and your mind and the land, and you can't. It's a lot harder to distract yourself from being with yourself and everything that entails. And so, and not to mention, it also takes some real commitment to like go out into the wilderness. Some people are comfortable, camping and stuff like that. Many for many people, it's quite new and quite scary, and that's often those are actually often folks who I lead are it's that's one part I love about it, is like working with folks who are totally new to backpacking, for example. And that element of challenge and fear and encountering the unknown is a very powerful ingredient in what creates a transformative experience.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. There has to be at some point kind of a maybe surrender is the right word
Hmm.
into the experience, you know,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
again that creates space for other things to emerge. So, I brought this up earlier. I alluded to this in our pre-discussion. So you hold these vision quests. People come out of them with some type of vision, insight about some, my guess is type of change or transformation or external manifestation of whatever that vision or idea is. What have you observed? What happens when people go in and try to make that happen in the world?
Mm. Yeah. Great. So some people come out of these experiences with a vision. Not everybody. It does depend on where someone is in their journey, and there's an element of mystery to it that I never that I don't pretend to understand, in terms of um, when someone's soul decides that they are ready to receive a soul encounter, to experience that sort of divine vision of their full potential. But the way I can make some sense of it is it's just, it happens when we're ready. And so sometimes, and I that's part of my role as the guide, is to do my best to discern, who's ready, and help them be as ready as they can by the time that they get to that point. But also to accept and acknowledge that uh, you could be ready for a vision quest experience, and you could receive exactly what you need and still not get the full blown vision just yet, because it's just, you had another step or so to make in the process, some kind of inner healing or holing journey, because we need to really be in our wholeness to a certain extent before we are ready to encounter our soul. And part of that, I think, is because that soul encounter uh, is so profound, and it's so often kind of life changing, and can be shaking, because it can feel so intimidating and challenging to actually bring it home, to like actually bring it into the world. To your question, when it does happen, and this is also, again, this is an area where I give a lot of gratitude to Bill Plotkin for his teachings, and pioneering around this journey. Um, and I find that one of the most important things to do after someone has that kind of profound encounter with their soul is to help them be patient with it.
Can I pause for a second on this? Because I imagine a lot of people who haven't had a soul encounter are like, what the hell does this feel like?
Yeah.
And have I had one? I don't know. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. Would be
Mhm.
curious to understand your characterization of what that experience can be like.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, and I'll just reference it if you really want to go deep and get a really detailed and thorough explanation of what I'm talking about. Check out Bill Plotkin's recent book, The Journey of Soul Initiation, and there's a whole chapter on soul encounter um, that is very well worth a read. And then I'll share my sense of it, which is a soul encounter. Well, first of all, can be characterized by the experience of um, a sort of strikingly strong and immediate shift in sense of self. Like I look back on my first soul encounter, which did occur on my first vision quest with the Animas Valley Institute. And perhaps more than any other transformational experience I've had, like it's easy for me to delineate. There was the Brooks that existed before this happened and the Brooks that existed after. Um, and it's not in the sense of like it also took me years to fully understand what had happened to me, and when I look back, the clarity of seeing that difference really comes through an embodied sense, an embodied feeling. There was a an experience of coming fully alive and being fully in my body and being so grounded and connected and inspired that showed up immediately when I woke up from this dream, which was the channel through which my first soul encounter came. Um, and there was also an immediate understanding of having been touched by something divine, which was remarkable for me as well, because at that point in my life, I called myself spiritual but not religious person, but I didn't have an active practice of being in conversation with or contact with spirit.
Mm.
But I just knew immediately that something divine had touched me. And I knew immediately that the vision that I had received was for me. It was, it's like being seen like I'd never been seen before. Like something divine reached out and showed me an image that was like, I got seen at my core at a level I'd never even imagined possible. And at a level that was at simultaneously so like incredibly nourishing and also incredibly intimidating. Like, oh my God, I have to live into that. Like, whoa, I don't know. This combination of like one of the characteristics of soul encounter is allurement and terror. It's like
Mm.
both ecstatic and scary uh, at the same time.
Mm. That sounds rich.
What
Yeah.
can I say? One more thing too.
Yeah.
One last piece that I think is important to bring in is that these visions, these images, or these visions are they operate on the soul operates on the level of image and metaphor. So it's often quite confusing to the ego. Um, so if you had a transcendent experience that your ego has a very clear story about what it means, it's probably not a soul encounter, or maybe it is, but you're missing the point. Soul invites us into the mystery, and so it's much more of like a living image that we discover more and more of over time and live into more and more of over time.
It's beautiful. I can't help but think of dreams and how those can be a gateway into um, the metaphors and messages that the higher versions of ourselves try to communicate to our conscious awareness.
Very same, yeah, very similar. Hmm.
Amazing. I think also it would be great to understand your perspective on, because I know there's just like a lot of people that listen to this. Maybe they go and they've had something like this. Maybe they go do a big psychedelic journey and they're like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, like I made contact,
Mm-hmm.
reality, and they go back into realistic.
Right.
And I know you work with people on kind of moving from realistic to that highest expression.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be curious what that process looks like.
Great. Yeah. This, Scott, I really think that this is like the juicy terrain, and more so in, our present day and in the sort of communities that you and I spend time in. We are, and thank goodness, like, so more and more people are finding pathways into awakening and the consciousness journey. And as that happens, I think a space that's quite underdeveloped, and where I see myself actually as, having the opportunity to create something additive, is this question of, okay, once you've had that awakening experience, once you maybe have made contact with your soul, or had that transcendent direct experience of what feels like your deepest truth, then what?
Right.
And
This is the nut, dude, to crack.
yeah.
And obviously there's many different things, but I completely agree. Now that psychedelics are coming online, all these people are having these transcendent experiences, and then finding themselves feeling exactly the same or even sad, uh,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
the weeks and months after, thinking that
Yeah.
the answer is to go do more psychedelics. And
Yep.
it's just,
And that can be that can be a trap. That can, yeah, you
oh
can run
yeah,
in circles for
big
years.
big time for a
Yeah.
lifetime, I imagine.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so very excited to hear your zeroing in on this, and I think many people are, because of the world we live in is soon going to require it.
Yep. Yeah. Great. Well, I'm excited to dive into this with you too. So I'll start by saying, I think this is a moment in the journey where, um, a lot of the more, maybe mundane but also timeless and ancient wisdom really comes to play. This is where, uh, the like, chop wood carrying water, that great Buddhist saying, like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. That really bears fruit here. So one of the most common challenges I see people run into is they come off of one of these peak experiences. They've made contact with the deeper truth of who they really are, and their true potential. And of course, they're so excited and, like, relieved, because, like, oh my God, yeah,
Right.
it's actually possible. I spent my whole life, like, hoping it was even available. Here it is. Right.
Right. There's that everything is going to be different moment.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And then we, of course, because we're human, we want the quick fix, or we kind of yearn for the, like, uh snap my fingers and everything changes. Um and the way I see it, it's like, if it were that easy, it actually wouldn't be so powerful. It actually wouldn't be so magical, because uh we're just way more complex than that as beings. We carry, so many parts of ourselves, so many patterns, so many inherited, you know, bodies of trauma and stories, and, energy, however you want to conceive of it, that which lives in us and through us, is so vast. And so the process of it's an important step, and it's valuable to get a window into that possibility, and these kind of experiences, and psychedelics are a great example here, because there is sort of like a dramatic and sudden like bump up a couple rungs on the consciousness ladder, and then a pretty dramatic and sudden kind of come back down. um, it's valuable to have those experiences as a way of seeing what's possible. And at the end of the day, if what you want is to imbue that kind of consciousness into your day-to-day experience, that path goes straight through just the day-to-day mundane gritty work.
Yep.
So helping people understand that, and also embrace that, because a place of victim consciousness there, where it's like, oh man, all this stuff is happening to me. I just had this big awakening. I realized that I am one with God and spirit and the universe, and God, like, I shouldn't be dealing with this lowly earthly drama. And that's like exactly the trap. It's like, actually, if all is genuinely God and the world is infused with spirit, then this drama is here for you. It's actually divinely architected to trigger you in just the right way, so that you can become aware of the next layer of your work to do, the next layer of the onion to peel back. So it's learning to embrace and love that which drives you nuts, that which you imagine is the, oh no, anything but this can't possibly be for me. If that's what you're thinking, it most certainly is. um
Yeah. Beautifully said. I've written about this term I've used to describe it, called the responsive reality, where yeah, the idea is that the number one prerogative of consciousness, the consciousness and the animating force that creates everything, is to realize itself.
mhm.
It's to that's why the great traditions call it self-realization with the
Mm,
capital S.
mm,
And so the orchestrating intelligence of the events around you shows you what stands in the way of that,
mhm.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it sounds kind of scary, and it can be in the initial phases, but when you realize the underlying dynamic that's happening, um, it actually turns into a really fun game. It can be, you know,
Yes.
it's like
Yeah.
you're like, oh
Totally.
man, sweet, I found a pattern, I found a trigger, I found a,
Yeah.
I found a thing,
Yeah.
and I think many people in our society, they love growth, they love, like, I think about all the biohackers and fitness people and
Mhm.
gamification, and they're gamifying their, their self identity. And I think the game of discovering your infinite potential and divine nature, like that, all that stuff is kind of like kindergarten, right?
Yes.
Relative
Yes.
to
It's the
this
ultimate game.
next phase, which is, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
ultimate experience. And I think, like, it's as that divine being, like, where would the fun and the hero's journey and the kind of glorious crescendo be if you just showed up and were like, booyah, like, point my
Mhm.
finger, this
Mhm.
turns to gold, like everything's automatically easy. Like,
Boring.
there's no there's no spectrum of experience in that.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like, I like to think of it as a big game of peekaboo.
Mm.
Like, we are playing peekaboo with our true capital S selves. Like, we like to kind of forget, and go and get triggered and kind of shrink back into the small self, and then remember, like, oh right, oh, I'm really more than that, and there's really more going on here. And yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think this is an important and useful pathway to come into a place of really loving and accepting. I might call it the darkness. It's easy to, in the spiritual path, just want to have light all the time, light, oneness, peace, and uh, there is an even richer experience that's available when we come to really understand and embrace, like, actually, I wouldn't change a thing. Like, actually, the
Mm.
existence of the darkness and that other end of the polarity is just as important and vital to the magic.
Well, tell me if you've had a similar experience. As my own kind of soul journey, embodiment, remembrance has emerged, what became quite apparent was that the darkness was a requisite step for me to basically fulfill that mission,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? And
Yeah.
it's kind of like I think about, like, I had another podcast guest on here where he talked about how shamans, it's like an initiatory requisite to have a serious illness and then
Mm.
to heal yourself from it. It's like you
Yeah.
kind of have to do that to become a medicine man.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think like that's an understanding you can read about, but it it's just very different to have the knowing of that,
Yeah.
right? To have the experience, like the of like the oh my God, now I know why I was like grinding like a maniac in the tech industry for 10 years. Like,
Right.
so that I
Yeah.
could minister to those people and understand them and empathize with them and, whatever it is, like whatever
Mhm.
your thing is.
Mhm.
But like, that's a beautiful moment, and that moment of recognition of the darkness and the challenge and the whatever it was preparation,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
100%. Yeah, I'm very aligned with that. There's this idea called the sacred wound that I love and use often in my work, is oftentimes sort of the darkest darkness in our beings, which then manifests and emerges in so many different of our life experiences, tracing back all the way typically to early childhood. uh it's like our deepest vulnerability, that wound that is so easy to get reactive around or fight against, and learning to, okay, then coming through the other side of learning to trust it, learning to think, well, maybe there's a higher reason why I have this wound, why we all as humans seem to, no matter, how privileged our childhoods, we all seem to come away from them with some kind of inner wounding. Well, it's like maybe that's part of our soul's plan, because that's part of how we are guided through these initiatory gates, and through to come to know our darkness and the darkness of the world, uh, so well that we can uh, develop it, like, be in our agency, truly be in charge of our own lives and not driven by our own shadows, and also led to our unique gift, because all we each have. That's the beauty. This is sort of the other side of the spectrum of sacred experience. One side is this oneness and spirit and light, and the other side is this darkness, the kind of underworld journey, as Plotkin calls it. This, which is the gateway into soul, which is our uniqueness, the way in which we are different than any other human being who's ever lived, and therefore have a unique possibility in terms of what is ours to give, what is ours to create in the world. But we only discover that through the path of doing our own healing and encountering our own darkness and learning to devotionally embrace it. And importantly, in my experience, that never stops.
Mm,
It does get easier, and um, the darkness never goes away. And I think that's for a good reason.
mm. Yeah. Well said. Well said. And I agree with you. I think one thing that's been um, coming up a lot in a lot of conversations I have is that many people are kind of starting this experience and they are no longer resonating with their current vocation. You know,
Mm,
I was talking to
mm.
someone that was recently like a sales leader, and it was like, I don't give a fuck about selling tech software anymore.
Yeah.
And like, it's so nourishing to my soul, but like, I need to feed my family, you know, like I need to make a living. And, my kid goes to private school, and like, you know, all the kind of stories that can come up.
Right.
I'd be curious how you advise people in these circumstances and what
Yeah.
you've observed.
Yeah. Great. Great question. Yeah. Good. Good. So this will give me a chance to get back to another piece I was hanging on to from your earlier question around integration from a quest or from a soul encounter. I think it's so. I find I often advise people first and foremost that part of the journey of soul is learning to be patient and letting go of the need to make it all perfect all at once. We generally hold a vision and a desire to at some point reach a place in which uh, our our avocation and our vocation are one, like two eyes become one in sight, to quote Robert Frost. Uh, uh, Another way I like to talk about this is the soul dance and the survival dance.
Like that.
So usually, you know, especially when we're just starting the soul journey, those two things are different. Maybe eventually we dream of bringing them together, but it's good to give ourselves permission to take our time with that, especially living in this world and this society that we live in that is not set up to support this journey, because it's a pretty countercultural thing to do still at this point. And given those headwinds, it can take some time. Likely, I think more time than it would take in a healthier society where all of the cultural and social institutions were architected around supporting people through this passage. So if you're that person who's awakening to your soul's journey and is still in that tech job, or whatever it may be, first of all, it's okay to do what you need to do to pay the bills, to take care of your family, to meet your basic needs. And even if that's not, even if it's starting to kill you to not have that aligned with your soul. And a couple things. One is, don't fool yourself about that being a temporary thing. Like it's important to get clear inside about why you're doing it. And he says, I'm doing this as my survival dance so that I can create the space and give the energy to starting to nourish my soul dance. We can have a soul encounter and just be at the very, very beginning of this long and beautiful journey of discovery of what does it actually mean? What is my soul, and what are my soul's gifts, and how can I actually bring them into the world? There's a lot of mystery there, and it takes time and devotion and energy to flesh that out to the point where those gifts are ready to really be brought into the world, especially to be made, you know, into your primary way of making a living. So give yourself time, but also uh, make sure you're clear on your inner priority. And if what you really want is to live a soul aligned life, then structure it as such so that you are creating the space however you can to be nourishing that seed. It's like planting a seed of the seed of the new you, this new sapling, you know, that can flower into the most beautiful tree you've ever imagined, but it's still just a baby, and it needs light, it needs water, it needs nutrients, it needs love. So if your old way of paying the bills is so uh, all consuming that it doesn't leave you any space, or barely any space, to be really nourishing that deeper part of yourself, then maybe it's time to make a change. Maybe it's time to reassess your stories or your ideas of how much you need, and find a way to have enough, but also step off the treadmill of the old
Mm,
way and start to
yeah,
build in a new way.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love the reassessment of needs. One thought I had around this was like someone mentioned to me like, oh, well, I have to send my kids to private school. Like we send our kids to private schools. We want to take vacations and like,
Yeah.
it's just not realistic doing what I want to do. And
Mhm.
I thought about, if now that I'm a parent, like, and being such a formative example that literally imprints how to live on my child's consciousness, am I more concerned about the math teacher being 30% better at the private school than I am about showing my kid that I lived how to live a soul aligned life?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just like a
Well
no
said.
brainer. It's just like a no brainer to me. What's going to have a bigger impact on this human? And
Yeah.
the other kind of things, just to share my own perspective on this, is like I think this it's not to minimize the importance of like doing work that makes you feel alive, but I find when you establish that inner allegiance that your evolution of your consciousness, of your full embodiment of your soul becomes the most important thing. And you realize that the events of every single day, every time you're triggered, every time you're ruminating, all of these disturbances and resistances are actually your gateway to transformation. That
Mhm.
completely recontextualizes how you view your career. It
Mhm.
becomes it becomes your training ground. And what you realize is that like being spiritual doesn't mean like you have to go be an energy worker or you have to go be a healer or you have to
Right.
go like so many people they're stuck in being spiritual and my calling is like working in spirituality, and it's like it's really just not true.
Yeah.
And
Especially as we get farther along on this, awakening journey as a collective, uh, like there's so many more things that need to be done to help our society function, but can be done from that spiritually aligned place. I was listening to an interview with Charles Eisenstein recently, and he said something I loved, which was that yes, we do choose our reality, but it's not a one-time choice. And often the response from life when we declare, inwardly and outwardly, like that for example, say I want to embark on this soul journey. I really want to prioritize it in the way you're talking about, Scott. It's almost like life will usually respond with, okay, are you sure?
yep.
What if what if this were to happen? Is that still how you
Yeah,
feel? It's like we have to actually show life and show our soul and show ourselves that yes, we are actually committed to this path. And it's through that we then discover and are guided into our unique way of living a spiritual life that is in deep authenticity with who we are and the path that we've walked.
100%. And I would also comment that it's when we show that commitment and we show that trust and we like fully say, okay,
Hmm.
fucking take it, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
like then the doors of support open,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the unforeseen opportunities, the synchronicities, the like random thing you never thought possible comes into your life. And so it's almost like, to me, that is like part of the initiatory process of of like having that aligned career. Is like it's like, I don't want to say a test, but like life will just really kind of push you to like, how committed are you really?
Hmm. Hmm.
And when you respond, when you step up into that and meet that truly, yeah, that's when magic happens, man. It's when miracles happen.
100%. It's one of those great paradoxes that as soon as we let go of attachment and genuinely open into trust, that tends to be when what we what we truly want, just emerges.
Yeah.
There's
And
one more piece I'd love to bring in here, if I could add
please,
another thread into this conversation about what happens after you have that awakening door that opens and you start to commit to this path. And there's a very useful concept that I learned from my mentors at the Conscious Leadership Group. They learned from their mentors, Gay and Katie Hendricks. It's called zone of genius. And I find this to be a really useful concept to kind of bridge the gap between that mystical encounter with your deepest truth and the kind of practical, nitty gritty reality of day to day life. And simply speaking, the idea of zone of genius is that we all have 4 zones that we can spend time in: zone of incompetence, zone of competence, zone of excellence, and zone of genius. Zone of incompetence and competence are fairly self-explanatory. They're the things that either we're really bad at or just okay at. Zone of excellence is when we're in our zone of excellence, what we're doing is something we are exceptionally good at. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, especially a lot of high achievers, because when
mm,
we're operating our zone of excellence, we get a lot of external reward for being there. We probably get paid well, we get validation, we get awards, etc. But on a deeper level, it still really feels like work. It's like net energy output to spend time in that space. Versus zone of genius is not only are we exceptionally good at it, at whatever we're doing, but it comes so easily to us. It's almost like we don't think about it. And if we're pressed to describe exactly what we're doing or how we're doing it, we might struggle to find the words, because it's just something that's so naturally ingrained in our being that it just happens. And this is, where we're in flow state. We sort of lose track of time, and it's a net energy gain to spend time in that zone. With skillful guidance, it's possible for anybody to start to identify by looking back through prior experiences of their life where they did something that not only were they quite good and successful at it, but they also really loved it. And it was fun. It was energizing. It was easy. You start to kind of trace the breadcrumbs of what your zone of genius is. And again, it's similar to soul. I think it's a key element is to not get stuck on any static definition of genius, and
mm,
and to allow it to be an ongoing mystery, and something that is more characterized by how you feel doing the thing than it is by what exactly you are doing. But I've found, and this is a framework I bring in with my groups that I guide on Vision Quest. One of the things we do afterwards is we do an exploration of zone of genius. We also talk about integrity, and we make space for community accountability and feedback. These are also really key elements of the journey, I think. Um, but you can start to trace those connections, and it's through getting in touch with that embodied feeling of what it's like when you're on purpose. What does it feel like when you're in your
mm,
zone of genius and fully alive? That no matter the circumstances of your life, you can start to just turn the dials a little bit by bit, to start spending more time in those places, to start investing and prioritizing in those moments in your life where you're able to access that. And that can be really key, because that can help you create a day-to-day experience of reconnecting with that magic in various different ways. And then each time you do reconnect with it, you learn something more, and you kind of get
mm.
one step closer. Um, and it leads me to, and I'll close with this, is one of my favorite quotes, the wisdom of the tracker. This is shared by Boyd Vardy, originally quote from Reynos, which is one of Boyd's mentors. Boyd Vardy's a lion tracker and life coach based in South Africa. He says, the wisdom of the tracker is, I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how to get there.
Mm.
I just keep following the next track. And so the way
That's
I hear that is,
beautiful.
those moments of alignment, those moments of aliveness and flow, and like, wow, being in our genius, like that's the next track. So if we can just keep on finding our way to the next moment of presence and aliveness, we will find our way.
I love that, man. And, I think it really, it emphasizes how it's kind of like being flexible on the form things take, how much of an imperative that is. And it's my own observation that like the thinking mind thinks it knows. It's like funny. It's like my limited self like thinks it knows what it wants, thinks it knows what's going to make it happy, but it's like that true self and the way that it guides you when you start to get in flow with it, it reveals what your deepest heart-filled desire really is.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think such a important concept because you can't think your way into the deepest alignment.
Totally. It just doesn't work.
You got to just like follow that next, it's like George of the Jungle. It's like follow that next rope that's in front of you and then swinging and you're waiting for the next one to emerge. And you just keep doing that until
and just trusting that it's there. You can't know for sure that it's going to be there or that it's what it's going to look like. It is that constant practice of kind of both surrender and agency at the same time. You get to choose how you show up in every present moment, and you get to just embrace the not knowing of what comes next.
I love it. Well, I think this is an epic time to just put a pin on the conversation.
Great.
Brooks, this has been awesome, man. I mean, we've said this before. I could talk to you for days about this stuff. But I think, look, hopefully this kind of opened the eyes of a lot of people listening to the show about vision quest, the power of nature, soul initiation, all the things we talked about. And I know that you create some amazing containers and experiences for this stuff as you also do some amazing writing on the topic. So I want to just give you, a few seconds, minutes, whatever here to just share more about that so that people that want to go deeper know where to find you.
Awesome. Yeah, great. So you can find me on my website. My company is called Starlight Leadership. So you can find me at starlightleadership.com. And there you'll see, you can learn a little bit more about the various offerings that I have going right now for those who are interested in getting more into this work. The key one I would highlight is the Power Awakening program, which is a 3-month group container that centers around a week-long wilderness-based vision quest, and then includes elements of both group and individual coaching before and after the quest to really support this process of being primed and ready for the deepest experience you can have, and then actually bringing it home in a meaningful way, so that by the end of the 3 months, you are really equipped to continue on this lifelong journey. And you can also find on my website there, you can find a contact form to reach out. I love speaking with folks who are interested in this stuff. So please feel free to drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. And then I would also just highlight my writing on Substack, starlightleadership.substack.com. My publication is called Embody Your Light. And that's a great place to stay in touch and also go deeper through my writing on all of these topics.
Amazing. Well, no need to memorize that. You can find it all in the show notes, all the links. And thanks again, Brooks. It was really, really a joy to spend some time together. And also thank you to everybody for listening. We appreciate you guys too.
Thank you so much, Scott. Been such a great time. Really appreciate it.